Welcome to this episode of Americana Station. I am India Ramey, and I am here today talking with Brittany Collins about her fabulous new album, Things I Tell My Therapist. And I just told Brittany I have a therapy appointment after this, so this is very, very apropos. Brittany, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited for you and this great album. I've been listening to it all morning and afternoon, and there's so many things about it that resonate with me. And we're gonna get into that. Before we do, though, I want to know more about you. Like, where did you grow up, and how did you ultimately come to music?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a question I'm still asking myself. But I'm from the Pacific Northwest. Grew up in a small town in Washington State, rural Washington State. Really, my kind of like journey into the music that I'm making now has been really interesting because, like, when I was a kid growing up, I think I really, like the roots in country music that like people were listening to around me. Cause like coming from a small town that was like pretty prevalent. And I think I just like associated that with like people that I didn't particularly like, whose values didn't align with mine. I went and so I was like a punk rock kid. I was like going to punk shows from the time I was like really young. And, so I almost feel like I kind of deconstructed, right? Cause you do this thing where you go back and listen to the bands that your favorite bands listen to, and then you listen to the bands that they listen to, and it's like all goes back to roots music. Like, it's everything has like its origin in like blues and country, folk, Americana, it's like all kind of comes from that same place. And so, as I got older, right, I think I started really like trying to figure out what my style was and like, what I sound like. I think so many musicians I know, like when you first start out, you're just like imitating the people that you like, right? And then it takes a while before you figure out like, what do I actually sound like,
Yeah.
And that can change a lot over time. But it's funny because, so I really like the place that like country and Americana is at right now, where I think that there's starting to be this recognition that it's becoming so much more inclusive of queer folks and folks with disabilities and people in like the BIPOC communities, and we're starting to realize like I'm, on this journey too of being like, roots music has so much in common with like punk rock, in that it's like the origin is that it was made by people who are being disenfranchised and like people who have gone through some shit,
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I align with, like give me a good sad song, and I'm like, I'm there all day. And so, that was kind of like where I came from in my like musical journey. And I'd like played in various bands, but I had never, like when I was a teenager, I was not that kid that was like in bands. I was very much like, I would go to shows and like be on people's street teams. And like, I was very like a big music enthusiast, but I had really low self-esteem when I was a teenager. And I just never really wanted to, I think it was one of those things that like, you don't want to do it and fail, cause it's too important, and it took me a long time. And honestly, it took the kind of frustration of a lot of my friends being like, this is stupid. You have to get out and do this. Like, you're just like your time, just like, you got to just go do it. And I was really glad that I had them like friends when I was in my early 20s to like push me to do that. Cause I finally started kind of like playing shows of my own and, integrating myself into like the local music communities and gained a lot of confidence with that. And, that kind of slowly led into what I'm doing today, which is, writing music and playing with my band.
That's really cool. It's so funny because a lot of the things that you say in your bio and in like previous interviews that I've read, and now that we're talking now, it echoes a lot of the things that I've said about about all of these subject matters, including Americana. Like these days, I feel like Americana is kind of, is like you said, like it's punk rock in its own right, because it's sort of like it's a rebellion against mainstream mainstream country music, and I have always identified with that too. I kind of like, I'm older than you are, but I grew up a little punk rocker because my sister was a punk rocker, like a for real punk rocker, and like in the 80s. And I wanted to be just like her. And I was really into new wave and stuff like that when I was little. And it wasn't until I was in college that I started to really embrace my father's music, because he was a huge country music fan. And I sort of like returned back to that, and it felt so natural. And these days it feels even more natural, because it's, the Americana genre is kind of giving the finger to everybody else and saying, listen, we'll take the wheel. We know what we're doing.
The more I like get into the more like I understand about the history, and the more like I'm a big nerd, when I'm like dive into a genre or a subgenre of music, I really want to know about the history. I want to know about who, not just who's playing now, who were they influenced by, like, I like to go back,
Mm-hmm.
And the more that I've gotten into that, the more I just really think it's bullshit that we have this idea of like country music. I think what a lot of people think of country music as is like this kind of like, I'd call it like bro country, where it's like pickup trucks and girls in short skirts. And like, not that there's anything wrong. Like, if that's your jam, go for it,
Right.
But to me, like, that was why I rejected that kind of like roots, education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was because that's who I associated that with. And I associated that with people that weren't particularly kind to me or any of my friends.
Right.
I like nowadays, like as an adult, like that really pisses me off, because I just think that it's like the scene is being gatekept by people that are not at all aligned with the original like purpose of country music, right? Which was that it was being played by poor people on their porches and in their fields, and it's supposed to be a community-minded thing. And like you said, kind of pop country these days is very much the antithesis of that. Like it's not at all based in that.
Right.
And I think that like there's merits to like pop country, like there's definitely like there are huge country bands right now that are like making great music. I'm not like by any means saying like if you're in the pop country kind of genre that like, throw it out altogether, right? But I just think that like it's so funny because we think of it as like being a new thing, like inclusivity in the genre, but it's like, it's not new. The genre literally was invented by people who were being, shit on by the man.
Well, you are an asset to the genre, and this album is a really great work. I gathered from reading, the bio about the album that this was a very introspective, very personal project for you. Why don't you share with the listeners like what the overall theme of this album is?
Yeah. So, honestly, at first it was kind of almost like a very like self-interested, I was in like a big period of reflection in my life. When the pandemic hit, I was in graduate school, and was, kind of like in a career transition. And frankly had really become more and more serious about music as I had gone along. Right. And so I was in this kind of crossroads of what was going to be my focus, what was going to be taking up most, because most musicians these days will know that like you really have to be intentional about how you spend your time, I don't have time for other hobbies, like this is like, I have a day job and then I like do this, you know? So I was kind of at that crossroads of trying to decide what was a priority in my life. And I was engaged to my now husband. And at the same time, being in graduate school, ironically, I had health insurance for the first time in a long time, and was able to like actually afford therapy. And so I was like unpacking all of these things that I never really like processed from my childhood. Came from a pretty dysfunctional family structure, you know? And so I was like unpacking all this stuff at the same time as I was looking at the future and thinking about like who I wanted to be, what kind of life I was building, you know, for myself and for my you know, myself and my husband and my community. Right. And so for me, I just processed things through songs. And I think what it became though, was that I really started thinking about like, for me, this album, like the overarching theme is really that like, I just want it to be all on the table. And I like more than anything want people to hear like people who may have like been through the shit, people who have like gone through hard stuff, people who have like had a rough start in life. You know, I just want people to hear that like, you know, they're not alone and like that, you know, just because you've gone through really rough shit doesn't mean like, you know, sorry, I'm swearing a lot. That's kind of you can let me know.
I have the mouth of a sailor. You're in good company.
Okay, good. I'm like, I actually forgot to ask if this was that kind of, you know, but you know, I just want people to know that like, you're not broken because you have like gone through this stuff and like you still get to decide like what kind of life you want to have and what kind of person you want to be. And, you know, a lot of us are like victims of circumstance and like you have, you know, like we all have differ in the terms of like resources that we have access to and leg up that we may have had or not had. Right. But at the end of the day, like you get to decide kind of like, you know, what kind of human do you want to be? You know, like what kind of impact you want to have on the people around you, you know? And so that was for me, a lot of this was kind of, I think for a long time, I felt like I had to like make up for all the stuff that I went through, like by being like this, you know, fitting into the box, you know, like I got a good job and I'm responsible, you know, like member of my community. And I do the things that responsible people are supposed to do. And really in doing all those things, I just was like not honoring any of the things that I actually wanted in my life. You know, like I never gave myself space to like actually pursue music because I didn't, to me, that the narrative that I had always been fed was that that's like selfish, you know, like, and so for me, this has really been about like learning to embrace, you know, being selfish and like go after the things that matter to me and hopefully convey to other people that like, that's okay. And like, that's, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. And that like, you only get one life and you might as well do the things that you like to do and that bring you happiness and, you know, screw the box that, you know, society tries to put you in. Cause like at the end of the day, they're not the ones who have to live your life, you know?
Yeah, no, I applaud that soapbox because I it's so weird. Like we have so many things in common. It's really odd. I mean, seriously, talk about being in good company. I gave up a 10-year law practice to pursue music for a full-time thing. And that's what I tell people all the time. I'm like, you know, especially when people younger than me ask me for advice, I'm like, follow your passion. Like, I know it sounds like a cliche, but do it. Like, don't let, you know, the programming or people's expectations tell you who you are, because, you know, only we can figure that out. Only we get to say who we are. And I think it's really great that folks like you too are inspiring other people to follow their dreams, because so many people are afraid to do that. And it is everything. Following your dream is everything. So, you know, congratulations on that too, because it's a brave thing to do. I talk to a lot of lawyers because my husband's still a lawyer, and so many of his colleagues and so many of my former colleagues kind of wish that they were able to do that. And I think more people should. So I welcome you to the to the board of people saying, follow your dreams. It's a good thing.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And, it's funny because like you say that, we're in good company, but, the more I talk to people, I think when I first wrote the record, I was a little bit like reluctant. I was fortunate to have a producer, my buddy, Dylan Welsh, actually, who is he normally is kind of a road dog. Like he spends most of his time on the road playing professionally for various bands. Right now he's in the Lowdown Drifters. He just happened to be off the road and we were like, doing that thing that all the musicians were doing around that time, which is just bitching about everything being terrible and having no gigs and no opportunities and, Yeah. And I was really kind of surprised because I had just been writing a lot of these songs, like I said, just a process. And he was really like, oh yeah, I like this. Like we could do something cool with this. And the more I talked to people, the more I realized, like at the time it seemed really like, this is risky. Like, I don't know if this is the kind of thing people want to listen to. Like, I don't know if this is the kind of subject matter people want to hear about. But the more I talk to people, the more I find that like people are like, I relate to this so hard. Like, and I realize that like, it's not as uncommon as we think it is. And I think there is a value, and like in us, like getting comfortable talking about that stuff, because especially in the music industry, I think so much of the time we're fed this idea, that it's like a young person, like you got to be like 19 years old and like, a heterosexual white dude with, friends in high places, like,
yep.
Or if you're a woman, like the rhetoric that women get fed is basically that we have like an expiration date and,
Yep.
the only reason anybody's going to care about what you have to say is if you're pretty and
Yep.
like you fit that kind of traditional, mold. And like, honestly, the more I talk to people, the more I'm like, literally, like, I don't know anyone who feels that that's like authentic to who they are, like we all are like kind of like these like weird misfits that, feel like we're secretly just like somebody's going to find us out, like they're going to figure it out that I don't, this doesn't come naturally to me, or like, I don't, I'm not like, I don't just like naturally, walk around with like this effervescence that I have when I'm on stage, like we're all just like secretly afraid that people are going to like figure out that we don't belong, when in reality, that's what makes us belong, is that we're all just trying to like figure it out.
Absolutely. We're not alone. And my friend Alex is very involved in music here in Nashville. And he's always reminding me, he's always saying that to me. He's always saying, you belong, because sometimes it is hard for us to believe that, ourselves, but that's what makes us belong. One of the other things that I'm really, that I really like that you're talking about in this album too is trauma and the profound effect that has on our lives and how it shapes how we see ourselves and how, we see ourselves in the world. And, I've been talking about trauma for a long time in my music, and Allison Russell talks about trauma. And I think that it's just a wonderful thing that more and more artists are talking about it and getting it out there, because most people are just walking around an unhealed trauma, and it needs to be talked about. So, share with me your feelings about that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think one of the best quotes that I ever heard about this that was a real light bulb moment for me was that healing from trauma isn't about becoming like, I think so many times I had this mindset too. It's like, you think that you need to become like this perfect person to like prove that you're better than that. But learning to love yourself, like with all the shit, like I don't have to become like, I don't have to be, have a 9 to 5 and like make a lot of money and like dress a certain way to be valid in my like humanness, you know? And so like for me, like really realizing I spent so much time, like I said, I felt like I was trying to kind of compensate for that. You know, especially, this has been a real, like my partner, he comes from like completely the opposite, like family structure. Like he has like his parents are still married, like very traditional nuclear family structure, like very supportive, you know, and like
mine too. My husband like had the most ideal upbringing. Yeah. I'm like, that's so great for you.
Yeah. And I'm like, that's amazing. That's awesome. And I love his family. Like I'm tight with his family. Like we're great. But you know, I think for a long time, I felt like I was kind of having to like make up for that, you know, like, oh, well, my family's kind of a hot mess. And like, I don't have the resources or the support that other people have, you know, and, you know, I'm the oldest in my family. So like, one of the things that it's probably a combination of everything, right? Like being the oldest and being a woman and being, you know, coming from that, like that family structure where, you know, my dad and I, like, I have not had a relationship with my father for like my entire adult life. He's not a super great guy. And my mom, like, I just watched her growing up, like try to like pretend we were normal. It was like her dearest wish that we would just appear to be normal. Right. And I'm really lucky in that she is also going through this, like she's been healing from this too. And, you know, cause I come from, you know, we talk about like generational cycles of trauma and poverty, you know, like my grandmother was a single mom. She had my mom at 16. Back then they kicked you out of high school for getting pregnant, you know? So, cause that's what a pregnant single 16-year-old needs is to not have college and not have a high school education. Right.
Right.
And so it just was these cycles and like, you know, so my mom didn't really have any good, like role models of what like a healthy relationship, like family dynamic looked like. Right. And then that like kind of got passed on down to me. And so for like what I took out of that, like growing up was just that, like, I like became a fixer, you know, like I wanted to fix I just wanted to make everything look normal. Like everything's fine. I don't need anything. You don't have to expand any resources on me. You know, I'm just going to be like easy. Like you don't have to, you know, and really the problem with that though, is that like, I've had conversations with this, like with friends about this. The problem is you think that what you're doing is making everybody else's life easier, but what you're really doing is not letting them in. And like, people don't know who you are. You can't become people if they haven't seen, you know, the shit that you're, you know, like, because I really, really believe that that's how we like bond with other humans is through like, you know, like that kind of recognition of each other's like human flaws and being like, yeah, you know, I like way, you know, like I kind of like you a little bit because of that, you know,
and vulnerability.
Yeah. Because when people are vulnerable with us, I think we feel like we've been let in to their, you know, a little bit inside their head. And that feels like a privilege. And so what I realized, you know, again, when I became an adult, right, that was not taking up any space and really, you know, not ever like vocalizing what it was that I actually wanted out of life. Like I wasn't letting anybody in. Nobody knew who the hell I was. Like nobody. And in that way, like nobody, I think, the whole thing is really, I think for me, like learning to take up space actually was what like really allowed me, like, I think it made me a better friend. It made me a better musician. It made me like, you know, I thought that I was doing all those things by like giving everybody else space, but like really, you know, it's like when you start being like honest about who you are, you actually like make it okay for other people to do the same thing in a weird way. And that's been kind of a big like learning experience for me.
Yeah. And like I said, like, it's just so good that we're talking about this because so many people, you know, I mean, there are people like you and me who have, you know, what I would call like more obvious trauma. But then there are people, you know, I know people who have just as much trauma as I do from less obvious things.
Right.
And so I feel, what I've learned is like, unhealed trauma can just, it can lead you down so many dark paths that just don't have to be tread if you can, if you can see how many things, are manifested in your life by that trauma. And then then you can just like identify it, name it, and forge your own path. So, it's a beautiful thing that you've picked up, all of this heavy subject matter and, made really great art, really relatable art from it.
Thank you.
So the opening song, The Apple.
Yeah.
The opening line is just my favorite. It's born from the wreckage of my father's mistakes. I still have his last name, but I'll give it away. Like, girl, I did that. I was like, how does she know me?
Oh my gosh. That's funny because that's one of those lines that like, you worry, you get in your own head, as a musician, you're like, I don't know if anybody else is going to like relate to this, but it came from that space really like of, my husband said this really beautiful thing to me when we were engaged. And that was that like, he's like pretty, cool with whatever I wanted to do. He was like, and he asked me at one point if I wanted to take his last name, which I have legally, and I said, oh, hell yeah. I want to do that. Like, I kind of said, and being snarky, like I usually am, that like, I didn't have any reason to keep my last name. My mom went back to her maiden name after my parents split up. And like, like I didn't really have any reason not to. And he kind of said something really beautiful, which was that he was excited because he felt like we were like building a new legacy together, like building our own kind of like family unit. And like, because, his family is something like he comes from a really solid foundation and he, that's something that he's really proud of. And, and so I loved that. I love that idea of like starting over, but I was kind of thinking about, how like, I don't know, I was just in one of those moods. I was like sitting in my band room, like, it was like late at night. I just was noodling around and that like a lot of times for me, like opening lines will just kind of pop into my head. And that was one of those where it just kind of popped into my head. And originally, of course, I was like, oh man, that's like way too dark. Nobody's going to but actually, yeah, like, I mean, it's honestly to this day, one of my favorite songs on the album. Like, I think it, it really, to me is like an introduction to like who I am, it's like, okay, this is like all my cards are on the table, Yeah.
I really love it. And I completely and totally identified with it immediately. Cause like, as a feminist, it was sort of like, I always thought that, I'll keep my name because I don't want to give up my identity or whatever. And then when I married my second husband, I did keep my name when I married my first husband. And by the time I married my second husband, I was just so done with, my father and all of his garbage. And I was like, I would pay somebody $1 million to take this shitty name from me. I'm like, Ramey, got a great ring to it. I think I'll take that. And it felt good. It felt good to just, shed that identity.
Yeah. Well, I know. And I totally love that, and I think about that a lot as a feminist too, is like this idea that, feminism isn't about saying like, you have to do this or you shouldn't do this, or right. It's about us making choices for ourselves. It's about, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want to be your name? Like, I honestly, I have some friends that this is like, I think like trend that's been kind of on the rise, like amongst like millennials and younger a little bit. But like, I have friends who like them and their husbands, like they came up with a completely new last name together, like they like, and I think whatever you want to do, like, that's the feminist thing. It's just about like having a choice, and for like, it sounds like for you too, right? For me, it was about having the choice of like, what do I want? What's going to serve me? what's going to feel authentic to like my wishes, you know, because I don't want to just make a decision out of tradition or out of obligation, you know. And it was kind of funny too, because before we were engaged, I had thought about, you know, as musicians too, right? You like think a lot about your name. You're always like, do I need to have a pseudonym? Do I need to change it? What do I need to do? You know, like, you become like hyper aware, especially when you're a singer songwriter, because it's like your name on everything. And so I went through this a lot, right? And I always like was kind of stuck with my dad's last name. And this is like a last name that, you know, like, and, you know, it was kind of one of those weird things where I was like, well, I could take my mom's maiden name, but she didn't know her dad either. So, you know, at what point am I just like taking some dude's name, like that has no relevance to my life, you know? So yeah, it was funny. I'm really glad that you like identify with that, because I thought it was a little bit of a long shot that people were, you know, like, but I'm glad, like, I think that shit should be talking, like, I think we should be talking about that stuff. And like, there are more people out there than you think that have like bad relationships with their family or certain members of their family, you know? And I think instead of like hiding it or being ashamed of it, we should just like be open about it, you know? Because that's how we find people who are like us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it resonated with me really strong. And, you know, I've been coming to terms with the fact that it's like, it's totally okay to disengage from a toxic family member, with just like, it's okay to disengage from a toxic anybody. You know, like, because ultimately, you know, our healing is paramount. So I loved that line, and I'm so glad that you wrote it. The other song that I really liked, because I like dark things, I really liked the Belvedere Hotel. Can you tell me what that song is about?
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite songs off of the album, like hands down, period, you know. But you know, we're like musicians, I think, are always like that. Like, you're always gonna like your like weirdest, like least commercial song.
Yeah, like give me a minor key. I'm a sucker for it. Yeah.
A minor key in an 8-minute long song, you know. Like, so that song, I always tell the story of the song at shows, because I think it like usually makes people laugh. But I always say it like, basically my husband and I don't know if this is a Pacific Northwest thing or if this is like if this is just like everybody, but we, you know, are like, we unwind by like smoking weed and watching true crime, and like, you know, that's like a fun, you know. And so we were watching Unsolved Mysteries, and there was an episode about Ray Rivera and the Belvedere Hotel. And this story was, you know, that it was this big mystery, obviously, like him and his wife were living in Baltimore, Maryland, and she was out of town. They had like a house guest over, and he just like disappeared. And like, they didn't know where he went. There was like a search, you know. A couple days later, they found him, and he had fallen through the roof of the ballroom of the Belvedere Hotel. And like, nobody knows how that happened. They're like, he could have theoretically like run and jumped from like the parking structure, like adjacent to the building, but that's like, that would be really weird.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a big mystery. And that was, you know, got my gears turning. I was like really interested in learning more about this story. And then I like kind of went down a rabbit hole. I started reading this book, and I wish I could remember the author's name, but she actually was living in part of the hotel had been turned into apartments by that time. And she was living in one of the apartments, and she was a writer. And so she like started like this whole like investigation, and like she started like digging into the backstory of the hotel, and like she was really interested in like trying to find out like what happened to this guy. Mm-hmm. And so to me at that point, I started thinking of like the hotel almost as like the main character in this story, as like an observer to all of these like things that have happened over the years, you know? And so for me, that was my into the song, was thinking about it from the perspective of like, I really like the idea of places having like memories, you know, like my husband's Indigenous. And so like, he talks a lot about like the energy that like is imbued into things, you know, by what's happened there. Right. And a lot of times that can be like good energy and bad energy. And, and like, I'm just really interested in that as like an idea or concept. And so for me, that was kind of my approach to the song, was thinking about it as like the hotel is like a character.
I love that.
Witnessing history, witnessing all these things that have happened, and to us as humans, when this thing happens, right, it's like a big deal. But to the places and the things that exist in that, that have existed there for hundreds of years, it's just another thing,
right.
It's just part of history.
It's a really cool song. And I went down the rabbit hole with you. So I'm really glad that
I'm so glad
that I got to experience that. The Things I Tell My Therapist is coming out. There were 2 different dates that I saw. There was one in August, one September. Which one is it?
Yeah. So we're doing our pre-release party tomorrow.
Awesome.
So that's going to be kind of an exclusive for like the people in my hometown community who've really always been really supportive of my music. The official release date is September 2nd.
September 2nd. Okay.
Yeah. So,
do you have any, do you have any tour plans?
Yeah. So actually I'm really excited. We're putting some stuff together. Going to be down at Americana Fest, in September, like what is that? Like the 13th through the 18th. Yeah. Got some stuff lined up for that. And then I actually, ended up just kind of as a fluke, had a friend in New Orleans who had like some gigs before that, and she wanted to throw me on those. So we're going to make a little run of it, and I'm going to do, probably do some dates in New Orleans, and then Memphis, and then Nashville. So we're gonna be kind of doing a little mini run after the album comes out. Just to play all the songs for
That's
everybody.
Fun. That's great. And you'll have to let me know where all you're playing for Americana Fest, because we'll be out and about.
Yeah.
And we'll have to come check you out. And I always forget to do this at the end of these interviews. So I want to make sure that I make a point of this. Tell our listeners where they can connect with you in the ether, out in the internet.
Oh yeah, that's such a great question. I always forget to talk.
Yes.
So I have a website, BrittanyCollinsBand.com. I'm on Instagram at Brit Makes Music. I think it's Brit Makes Music on Facebook too. Like if you want the actual web link, but you can also just search Brittany Collins Band. Mm-hmm. So I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on, I got a YouTube. I actually put stuff up semi-regularly on YouTube. I like to do stuff while we're traveling. I'll just do these little impromptu acoustic videos wherever we happen to be at.
Right.
So yeah, and I'm pretty good about posting, when I'm playing shows and when I'm releasing new music and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm online, I'm on all the things as most of us are these days.
Awesome.
Right?
And we'll be able to find the album after its September release date on all the digital platforms and everything like that.
All the platforms. Yep. I got a Bandcamp and Spotify and Apple Music, iTunes, wherever YouTube music, wherever you listen to music, it's going to be out September 2nd. And, I think we have one more single to release before the album officially launches. We've released 3 so far. We've got, we did, The Apple was the first one. And then we did our song 2 Worlds. And this last week we released the song The Journey, which is a fun little kind of like more of an upbeat, funky tune. But so we've got lots of music out. Another single going to be coming out before the album, officially drops. Hopefully, lots of fun stuff for people to watch.
That's exciting. I'm very, very excited for you. You're a good writer, and I love your voice and love your vibe. And I definitely feel like we knew each other in a life before this one. So it was really,
I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
It was very cool to connect with you, especially through the best medium in the world, which is music. And I can't thank you enough for joining me on Americana Station today. Let's keep in touch, and we'll come see you for Americana Fest.
Heck yeah. I would love that.
All right.
we'll definitely connect. And I really appreciate you having me on and your patience as we work through the technical.
It's all good. It's all part of it.
Right? Everything advances, but it also all stays the same. Like we all have new ways to connect with each other, but they're just as buggy as they've always been.
Absolutely.
But, I really appreciate you having me on, and I hope you have a good session with your therapist.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again, Brittany. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. You have a good one.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.